Welcome to the Season 2 premiere of In the Arena. Over the course of the next 5 weeks, we'll be exploring the changing political landscape here in Southeast Missouri with the election of Bill Emerson to Congress in 1980. We're going to be talking to some of Bill Emerson's longtime staff. We have Lloyd Smith here, longtime Chief of Staff for Bill and Joanne Emerson. And we're also joined today by Phillip Britt. He was a state representative from 1999 to 2002 for the 163rd District. Phillip, Lloyd, welcome back to In the Arena. It's been a while since we've been all together, but glad to have you back.
Glad to be back.
You know, we started this show last fall with the premise that political discussions can be both educational and civil, which is something that seems to be disappearing more each year. Have we spent so much time digging into our political arguments that political civility is just an unrealistic expectation? Phillip, what do you think?
I don't know that it's so much digging into our political arguments as it is that politics have gotten way more personal as opposed to policy driven to me. And I remember when I was in the legislature, I could have a great debate on the floor with someone who understood that we were both advocating for our own side of the issue. And then once that debate was done, we could go to the back and drink a cup of coffee and we were still friends. But there were people who were on the floor of the House when I was serving who took things very personally. And if you would get into a debate with them over a particular issue that they held close to their heart and took it very personally, there wouldn't be any drinking coffee in the back after it was over. They would be very upset, and they would feel like that I had attacked them in some way, which I had not. I'd attacked the issue, but not them personally. And I think people today, more than just that one or two, which I dealt with, it seems to be the majority of people today take the argument personally, as opposed to it being about issues.
One of the things is that, you know, I went to the Lincoln Library up in Illinois, and I noticed that some of the ads that ran in the newspaper were brutal. I think now what's happened is that everything gets amplified, social media, television, and so sometimes the argument about the efficacy of a particular policy gets lost because of the way the campaigns get run up against each other. And I think then that causes people to move to their separate corners. You know, in boxing, you know, they move to their separate corners. And once you do that, you lose the ability to compromise, and you lose the ability to find something positive in the other person, and why do they think like they do, and why do they support what they support. If you're so interested in staying in your corner, you haven't walked a mile in their shoes.
Now, I feel like in Southeast Missouri, it's got so tribal. I mean, that could come with Republican supermajorities. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's had a trickle-down effect on even the Republican Party to a redder extent in Southeast Missouri. So do you see that tribalism going on in Southeast Missouri any different than other areas?
You know, I see a little bit of it. I mean, you know, we changed the dynamic. You know, part of what we're going to be talking about in future episodes is the change in the political affiliations. I think part of it is the people read more, they learn more, they maybe decide where they're going to be on an issue. And I think ultimately, if we could keep people reading more and talking more, we'd have a whole lot better system of government, whether it's Southeast Missouri, Missouri as a whole, or the country.
You get so much better outcomes when you're dealing with facts, right?
Absolutely. You know, I can remember all the way back in the early Bill years, you know, we had to, Bill Emerson was in the minority most of the time he was in the Congress. And so we had to work with the other side in order to achieve goals that would represent the people back here at home.
Bill Emerson earned the respect of many office holders in Washington, D.C., and many office holders here in the state of Missouri participated in a tribute, which was sponsored by Missouri Farm Bureau upon the late Congressman's death. Let's take a look.
Bill Emerson was a great friend and a very valuable political ally for all of those of us who believed in good, clean, responsive, conservative government. He fought hard for rural Missouri, bringing roads and bridges and transportation. He was concerned about the hungry and worked to help feed them. But he was a real champion of agriculture. He knew that America's farmers and Missouri farmers were the best in the world, and he supported the research to make them even better. And he fought to get them access to the world markets so they could improve their income and strengthen the communities which depend upon agribusiness.
Bill was a good friend of mine. For some 8 years, he and I drove to and from work from McLean, Virginia to the Capitol nearly every day. And of course, we had a lot of interesting discussions. Bill was a historian. He liked to speak about the history of Missouri. He liked to discuss with me military affairs, rural American affairs, agricultural affairs. And he also had a great sense of humor. From time to time, he would drive up in front of our townhouse in McLean with the windows rolled down and his radio blaring "The Stars and Stripes Forever." I have a wonderful memory of Bill Emerson, and I'll miss him. He was a good friend.
I think Bill Emerson saw himself in the context of public service historically. He understood the reason the founding fathers established America. He understood the price they paid, and that always motivated him, seeing himself in the history of this country. He said, if these cared this much, they devoted their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the achievement of the objectives of freedom and opportunity and individual responsibility, he put himself in that frame of reference. That's why he was devoted to principle. That's why he never lost sight of the real meaning of America. And I think that was important to Bill. He saw himself in the historic concept of what America was founded to be and the potential of what America ought to be.
Phillip, why does Bill Emerson's story still resonate 40 years later?
I think Bill Emerson's story resonates because he was the ultimate underdog. I mean, you're talking about a region of the state, region of the country that was as democratic as any you could have found at the time. Historically, very democratic. Every legislator, every state senator, every the congressman, a sitting congressman was a Democrat, and he ran against the establishment. And as a result, he knocked off a sitting congressman with a significant amount of clout and a significant amount of support in the district. That'd be like somebody today saying, you know, a Democrat in the current 8th Congressional District coming up and winning against Jason Smith. Right now we would say that's impossible. Well, people would have said the same thing in 1980. A lot of people, I'm sure, did say the same thing in 1980. And yet it happened. And so I think the reason it resonates with us is because it proves that there's always hope. There's always that opportunity for the right person to come along at the right time and take advantage of the political swings that naturally happen in our society.
Lloyd, what do you think? The stars lined up right in 1980, but 40 years later, what's your reflections on that?
You know, the stars did line up. 1980, Reagan beat the peanut farmer from Georgia, and it was a big year here in the state of Missouri. Kit Bond came back and won after losing in '76. So he was a two-term governor with one term in between the two. And I think Bill Emerson came back and he talked about the issues that people cared about. And at that time, Jefferson County was in the district all the way. The old 10th went all the way down to the Boot Heel. There were issues in 1980 about taxes, energy. Farmers were concerned about the embargo. There was issues about busing for DSEG coming out of St. Louis into that county called Jefferson, which is contiguous to St. Louis County. So I think he talked about the issues directly and took them straight to the people. And if there is a legacy, I think he continued to do that until his death in 1996.
Phillip, 40 years later, what would this district, what would it look like if Bill Emerson would have lost in 1980? What's your opinion on that?
Wow. I think probably that the district would be predominantly Republican now, only because that's what we've seen across the state of Missouri and across rural America in general. We can't give Bill Emerson and Lloyd Smith all the credit although they deserve a lot of the credit for starting the movement a lot earlier here, probably in southeast Missouri. You know, I've always wondered myself, in 1982, there was a push to recruit Steve Sharp to run for Congress. He was Duncan County prosecutor, fairly well liked. And I've always wondered what would have happened if he'd gotten in that race. He was pretty popular. He ran for state senate the next time, and proved to be a very popular candidate in 6 or so of the counties that were part of that congressional district. Don't know if he would have won or not, but that would have been probably the time that Bill Emerson would have been most vulnerable, the first time that he ran for re-election. Most incumbents, that's the case. But I believe that based upon what we've seen elsewhere, that we would still probably be a fairly Republican area, just might not have happened as quickly.
Lloyd, what do you think if Bill Emerson would have lost to Bill Burleson in 1980? What would this district look like?
You know, it's hard to say, but I think, much like Phil said, I think the trend was moving. You know, 82 was a tough election. We'll talk about that in a future episode, but it was a tough election. It was Bill had moved from Jefferson County to Cape Girardeau, had to run against Jerry Ford, whose family was well known, and Jerry was an incumbent state rep. I think it would have moved, if it hadn't moved in 80, I think it certainly would have moved in 84 with the re-election of Ronald Reagan, and the economy by then had turned around. And I think the voting pattern of a Democratic congressman between 81 and 84 would have been some pretty tough votes to sell back home in the 8th district. So,
and you would have thought Jerry Ford, being from Cape Girardeau, would have been a dominant vote getter there, and he was, because that was also a close race.
That was a close race. They still won pretty considerably. I think part of the problem is that, you know, if you've only ran for state rep and you've never ran a congressional race, putting the team together to do that was extremely difficult. And Bill had done a lot of things that changed the way we delivered services. We've talked in the past and probably in the future about the mobile office and Congress in the classroom and farm tours and business tours, and the way we amplified those messages using the press. We were a little bit ahead of our time in some regard from the old way of doing business, and we had a lot of newspapers, and we spent a lot of time talking to them.
So Bill Emerson kind of was a merger between wholesale and retail campaigning, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he loved the campaign trail, and he loved to serve the people, and he was really focused on the district, not so much in leadership in the U.S. Congress, but in the people back home in the district.
Phillip, you were among the last Democrat office holders in the last 40 years. While you were in office and after you were in office, did you actually see this transformation happening from blue to red?
Well, absolutely. I had a great opportunity to intern with my friend the late Larry Thomason, who was my state rep, in 1991. And in 1991, there were only three Republican state reps in all of southeast Missouri. There were 2 in Cape County, Mary Caston and David Schwab, and then Mark Richardson from Poplar Bluff had just been elected to the House. And so it was, and from that particular time until I was elected in 1998, I mean, you're talking about 4 elections, there were only 2 Democratic state representatives in southeast Missouri. That was myself, who had just been elected, and Marilyn Williams from Dudley, just north of our district. We were the only 2 left. That particular election, we'd replaced a couple in southeast Missouri. Peter Myers had defeated Joe Heckemeyer, and Laney Black had defeated Betty Hearns, they were running to replace Gene Copeland, who was a long-term Democratic state representative from southeast Missouri. So the 2 of us, and then Denny Meredith, who was an independent, but really wanted to caucus with the Democrats when he could. But we were the only ones that weren't Republicans at that point in time. And so, yeah, the change was happening. It was happening a lot faster than I would have ever anticipated it was going to happen. When I was there in 91, Democrats still had, I think, 97, 98 members, so a fairly sizable majority, considering 82 is the majority. But by the time I got there, we had 87. And then my second term, we had 85. And so, talk about having to compromise. You had to compromise because you couldn't get, and when I was there, it was more about rural issues versus urban issues than it was Democrats versus Republicans. In fact, we used to like to say, at least before me anyway, that St. Louis County Republicans were a whole lot more liberal than Southeast Missouri Democrats were. And that was the reality, especially on social issues. They were for the most part more liberal back in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, it was easy to see that it was happening. I don't know that I would have ever predicted the swing that happened, but Republicans were really good at finding the right people to run. They cultivated school boards and city councils and those county commissions. And from there, those folks then ran for state rep and state senate. They were great proving ground, great opportunities to get out and become known. And then they were able to switch the House pretty quickly.
So Lloyd, besides Phillip having a hard time carpooling by the end of his term, he couldn't find any Democrats to ride with. You had a front row seat to this transformation from blue to red, but did you know it was going to happen that fast?
We began to feel it was moving in our direction. I think we, as Phil said, we had a better recruiting process. We had a better training process. Our campaign committee in the House and the Senate actually recruited candidates that we thought could win. If it was primarily a farming district, the Peter Myers, the Laney Blacks were extremely important to that coalition, and you had to give them the tools. But we had a way to put together the kind of volunteer base that would help them in every parade, every festival, whether it's in Oran or Sykeston or Kennett or Dexter or Poplar Bluff or Portageville Soybean Festival. We knew how to put together a parade, we knew how to put together the volunteers, and we gave them that expertise. And most of the time they listened. Sometimes, as always, they chose their own course, but we didn't lose many if we stepped in with everything that we had. And we used the Team Emerson apparatus. We knew how to look for the votes and turn the votes out on election day.
And also, Lloyd, just to follow up on that, like Laney Black lost to Gene Copeland his first time. Y'all didn't give up on him. Y'all believed in him. Y'all knew he was going to win the next time.
Yeah.
That apparatus stayed in motion for the next 2 years.
It stayed in motion. Laney's one of those that loved history, and I told him about James Madison and his situation where he'd lost for a Virginia assemblyman. And the first time around, in some similar situations, that's where we had the beer coupon deal in the first race. And in the second race, he actually ran against his own choir director in First Baptist Church of Charleston. But he did it because he believed that he could be a good representative of the people in that district.
And the rest on that's history.
And the rest on that's history. And we replicated that all across the 8th at the time.
And I don't think church was awkward after that.
No. I mean, I think he still sang tenor, and she still corrected him all the time, whether he was a state rep or not.
Interesting story about that. The two of them, they did get along pretty well. We were at the groundbreaking for the Charleston prison. Yeah. And Laney stood up and said just amazingly good things about Betty Hearns and how she'd actually been the reason why they'd gotten the prison and that she'd led the charge. And then he introduced her and she got up and she said, "Well, that's not the way you were talking about me last year."
But that was sincere, I think. They had a friendship.
Absolutely.
Just from being from the same area.
Well, and that's part of what we saw in the 90s as opposed to today. We saw people that could campaign against one another, could say things about each other politically and from a policy standpoint, and then in the end still work together for their communities. We don't see that as much now as we did back then.
Maybe we can get back to it.
Hope so.
Phillip, it's took 40 years for this transformation from blue to red in rural America, rural Missouri, the 8th District here in Southeast Missouri. Do you see any circumstance where the Democrats can get back in business here in rural Missouri?
Oh, I think there's always opportunities. I think that it's clear from history that politics and policy is cyclical. It goes back and forth, but it's a tough road. There's got to be a person that steps up as the leader of that, similar to the way Bill Emerson did, where he kind of took it on himself with his staff to kind of change, as Lloyd said earlier, change the dynamic. And I think that the one thing that the Democrats struggle with right now is the fact that the leadership has a tendency to be, well, on both sides, it has a tendency to be very far right or far left. This is what we see more than we see moderates at this point. I think the opportunity for change is if we can find moderates that can get elected again. Now, the issue that Lloyd and I have talked about several times is each of us probably is too moderate for our parties as we currently function. And could we even get elected today? Could Bill Emerson get elected in a primary in Southeast Missouri right now? I don't know. Based upon the policies of 1980 through the time he was there, maybe not. Because his focus was certainly different than what a primary opponent would be focused on today. And so I think finding somebody in that middle range is the only way that there's an opportunity.
That's a good point, Lloyd, that Phillip's made. What do you think about the transformation? Can it cycle back?
I think it'd be difficult to cycle back because of the National Democratic Party focused, it seems, much more on the urban centers. And rural America will still be rural 20 years from now in Southeast Missouri. And the issue grid may not break a way that a moderate Democrat could get elected. And I think ultimately the country is going to have to re-examine where they are. Are we a center-left country? Or are we a center-right country? If we move toward the center-right, I think there are ways that a moderate Democrat could be elected in the 8th District, but it would be a real stretch because we now own a lot of the county seats, the county courthouses, the county commissioners, all the way down to the coroner. In some of these counties, that hadn't happened since Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. So I think it'd be a tough haul in this part of the state of Missouri.
And a lot of it's based on what's going on nationally. I know a lot of your campaigns, you nationalize some of the issues, and it would take the perfect Democrat and some good headwinds or tailwinds to actually make that happen.
Yeah, it would take a 1980 on steroids for the Democratic Party, I think, to pull rural America the direction that the Democratic Party is today. I think ultimately the Republican Party probably is, to the right of center, and this particular district probably is to the right of center.
We have been discussing how the election of Bill Emerson has changed the political landscape in Southeast Missouri since his election in 1980. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the show today. Lloyd will be joining us for 3 more episodes as we discuss Lloyd's journey with the Emersons. He was chief of staff for both Bill and Joan Emerson, and we look forward to Lloyd sharing that story. But first, we'll be joined by former Missouri Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder. He was Bill Emerson's first campaign manager in 1980.